I've been driving the night shift on Route 23 for 15 years now. You see all kinds of things when you read behind the wheel from midnight to 6 in the morning. Drunks, insomniacs, hospital workers heading home after long shifts. But nothing prepared me for what happened last October. It was around 3 in the morning, that dead hour when even the city seems to hold its breath. I was making my usual loop through the industrial district, expecting the bus to stay empty like it usually did on weeknight. The streetlights cast long shadows across the empty road, and a light fog had started rolling in from the river. At the Morrison Street stop, I saw someone waiting, a woman in a white dress, which struck me as odd given how cold it was that night. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield. I pulled over and opened the doors. She climbed aboard without a word, her movements stiff and mechanical. Her hair hung down over her face, and she kept her head lowered as she dropped exact change into the fare box. The coins were ice cold. When I glanced down at them later, she walked to the very back of the bus and sat in the corner seat, still silent. I shrugged it off. People who ride the night bus often want to be left alone with their thoughts. I've learned not to pry. I continued my route, checking my mirrors periodically. She sat perfectly still, never moving, never looking up, just staring down at her lap. At each stop, I'd open the doors and wait. Nobody got on. The fog was getting thicker, making it harder to see more than a few feet ahead. The bus's headlights cut through the mist like weak flashlights. I was completely alone with this silent passenger. Around 3:45, I pulled up to the Riverside stop. Through my mirror, I saw the woman stand up and walk toward the front. But something was wrong with the way she moved. She seemed to glide rather than walk, her feet barely touching the floor. As she got closer, I felt the temperature inside the bus drop dramatically. I could see my breath again, even though the heater was running full blast. She stopped right beside my seat, and for the first time, I got a clear look at her. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, with a bluish tint. Water dripped from her hair and dress, pooling on the floor around her feet. But what terrified me most were her eyes when she finally raised her head. They were completely white, no pupils, no iris, just blank white orbs that seemed to look through me rather than at me. "Thank you for the ride," she whispered, her voice sounding like wind through a tunnel. "I've been waiting at that stop for 30 years. Before I could respond, before I could even process what she'd said, she stepped off the bus. I watched in my side mirror as she walked into the fog and simply vanished, like she'd been absorbed into the mist itself. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I sat there for several minutes, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. But when I looked down at the fare box, those ice-cold coins were still there, and there was a puddle of water on the floor next to my seat, with wet footprints leading to the door. The next day, I did some research. I learned that 30 years ago, a young woman named Sarah Mills had died in a car accident near Morrison Street. She'd been on her way to catch the last bus home from her night shift at a factory. Her body was found in the river, still wearing a white dress. She'd apparently been waiting for a bus that never came. I still drive Route 23, but I never stop at Morrison Street anymore. I tell dispatch the stop sign is broken, that it's too dangerous. Sometimes, late at night, I see her standing there in the fog, waiting. I keep driving. I always keep driving. My name is Marcus Reed, and I drove a school bus for Lincoln Elementary for 8 years. Past tense, because I quit 3 months ago after what happened. I loved that job. I loved the kids, their energy, their silly jokes, the way they'd wave goodbye when I dropped them off. But some things you can't come back from. It started on a Tuesday in February. I was running my usual afternoon route, dropping kids off one by one. The weather was terrible. One of those winter storms that makes everything gray and miserable. Snow was falling so thick I could barely see the road ahead. I'd already dropped off most of my passengers and had about 6 kids left. We were heading down Oakwood Drive when I noticed something strange in my rearview mirror. There were more kids on the bus than there should have been. I counted 9 children. But according to my list, I should only have had 6. I figured maybe I'd miscounted or some kids had moved seats. But then I noticed them. 3 children sitting in the very back row, absolutely motionless. They wore old-fashioned clothes, like something from the 1950s. 2 boys in short pants and button-up shirts, and a girl in a dress with a Peter Pan collar. Their skin was pale, almost gray, and they stared straight ahead without blinking. "Hey," "You three in the back," I called out. "What are your names? What stop are you?" They didn't respond. Didn't even turn their heads. The other kids on the bus had gone completely silent, which was unusual. I glanced back at them and saw they were all staring at the three strange children with wide, frightened eyes. "Mr. Reed," whispered little Emma from the third row, her voice trembling. "Who are you talking to?" "The three kids in the back," I said, confused. "Mr. Reed, there's nobody in the back. It's empty." I looked in the mirror again. The three children were still there, clear as day. One of the boys slowly turned his head toward me, and I felt my blood run cold. His eyes were completely black, like someone had filled the sockets with ink. I pulled over immediately, my heart pounding. "Everyone, off the bus." Now, the 6 real children scrambled off, running through the snow to the nearest house. I sat there frozen, afraid to turn around and look directly at the back of the bus. Into mirror, all 3 strange children were now staring at me. Their mouths opened in unison, but no sound came out. They just sat there with their mouths hanging open, wider and wider, impossibly wide. Then they vanished. 1 second they were there. The next, the back seats were empty. I called the school, called the parents, called the police. Everyone thought I'd had some kind of breakdown. But the kids, the real kids who'd been on the bus, they backed up part of my story. They said the bus had gotten scary and they'd felt cold and wrong. Emma had nightmares for weeks afterward. I did some digging at the local library. In 1957, a school bus from Lincoln Elementary had crashed on Oakwood Drive during a snowstorm. The bus slid off the road and hit a tree. 3 children died instantly. 2 boys and a girl. Their names were Timothy Clark, James Morrison, and Catherine Wells. When I found their school photos in an old yearbook, I nearly passed out. They were the same children I'd seen on my bus. Same clothes, same faces, same empty stares. Other bus drivers told me later that they'd seen strange things on that route too. Cold spots, shadows moving in the back seats, children's laughter when the bus was empty. But nobody wanted to talk about it openly. The school district didn't want the publicity. I quit the next week. I couldn't do it anymore. Every time I looked in that rearview mirror, I was afraid of what I might see. Some people say the dead are harmless, that ghosts can't hurt you, but they've never seen those black eyes staring back at them. They've never heard the silence that follows when children who aren't there try to speak. I miss driving. I miss the kids. But I'll never get back behind the wheel of a school bus. Not on Oakwood Drive. Not anywhere. They say every city bus driver has a story about a passenger who made them uncomfortable. Someone who sat too close, talked too much, or just gave off a bad vibe. But the man I'm about to tell you about wasn't just uncomfortable. He was impossible. I'm Janet Corso, and I've been driving city buses in Seattle for 12 years. I drive Route 47, which runs from downtown through some of the rougher neighborhoods and out to the suburbs. You develop thick skin in this job. You learn to ignore the weird stuff and just drive. It was a rainy Thursday evening in November. The sun had already set, and the streets were slick with rain. I had maybe 10 passengers scattered throughout the bus, most of them with their faces buried in their phones or staring out at the wet city passing by. At the Pine Street stop, a man got on. He was tall, maybe 6.5 feet, wearing a long black coat that dripped with rain. His hat was pulled low over his face, and he moved with a strange, jerking motion, like a puppet on strings. He paid his fare with crumpled bills that felt damp and cold, then walked to the middle of the bus and sat down. I continued driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror at this man. He sat perfectly upright, hands folded in his lap, head still angled downward so I couldn't see his face under the hat. He never moved, not even when the bus hit a pothole or took a sharp turn. At the next stop, 3 passengers got off. At the one after that, 2 more left. The man in the black coat didn't move. Within 30 minutes, every single passenger had gotten off except him. I was alone with this silent, motionless figure. "Sir, what's your stop?" I called back. No response. "Sir, I need to know where you're getting off." Still nothing. He just sat there like a statue. I kept driving, my palms sweating on the steering wheel. The rain was coming down harder now, and the wipers could barely keep up. At each stop, I'd open the doors and wait. hoping he'd get up and leave. Ne perdí. We reached the end of the line. The turnaround point in the suburbs, where I'd take a 15-minute break before heading back downtown. I pulled into the empty parking lot and turned off the engine. "Sir, this is the last stop. Everyone off." He didn't move. I stood up and walked down the aisle toward him, my flashlight in hand. As I got closer, I realized something that made my skin crawl. I couldn't hear him breathing. There was no sound of breathing, no movement of his chest, nothing. "Sir, you need to leave the bus now." I reached out to touch his shoulder, but stopped inches away. Something told me not to. Some primal instinct screaming that touching this man would be a terrible mistake. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on him. That's when he moved. His head tilted up slowly, mechanically, until he was looking at me from under the brim of his hat. What I saw will haunt me forever. His face was pale and waxy, like a corpsey, but his eyes, those eyes were the worst part. They were yellow, with vertical slits like a snake or cat. Not human, not even close to human. His mouth opened, revealing teeth that were too white, too perfect, too many. When he spoke, his voice sounded like gravel scraping across metal. "I died on this bus," he said, 23 years ago. Heart attack. Seat 17. Nobody noticed for 3 whole stops. I sat here, dead, while the bus kept moving. While people got on and off. While the driver kept driving. Nobody cared. Primera ese frozen, unable to move or speak. So now I ride. I ride every night, on every bus that runs this route. I sit, and I wait, and I watch. And sometimes, when the bus is empty except for the driver, I make myself known to remind you. To remind all of you. We're passengers too, even after we die. He stood up then, his body unfolding in ways that weren't natural. Joints bending at wrong angles. He walked past me, toward the front of the bus. I pressed myself against the seats, afraid to let him touch me. As he passed, the temperature dropped so much I could see my breath. He stopped at the door and turned back to look at me one last time. "Thank you for the ride, Janet. I'll see you again." Then he stepped off the bus and dissolved into the rain like he was made of smoke. Primera reporte de italiano, told my supervisor. Everything. They checked the records. 23 years ago, a man named Harold Vance did die of a heart attack on Route 47. Seat 17. The driver didn't notice until the 3rd stop after it happened. I still drive Route 47, but I never look at seat 17 anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I feel someone get on the bus, even when no one's at the stop. I feel the temperature drop. I hear the wet footsteps moving down the aisle, and I just keep driving, my eyes straight ahead, my hands gripping the wheel, because some passengers never reach their destination, and they never stop trying.